obviously not all films are going to be able to have just one location. So the other part with minimizing the location, and this is a technique I used when Beth and I were writing The Surrogate. And what you have is you have one main location where a big chunk of your film happens, and then several other locations. And again, Hitchcock was a genius on how he was doing it. And this is what he did with Psycho. If you watch Psycho, the majority of the film is set at Bates Motel. Once we get to Bates Motel, they duck off to some other locations briefly, like the sheriff's house and the church. We cut back to Marion's lover talking with his sister. But predominantly, after they set up the start, most of the film happens at that location. And Clerks, which was that great little 90s comedy film, that's the same thing. The majority of the film is set at the convenience store. So we do see his house, we do go to the video store, a little bit outside, but most of the screen time is happening at that location. Because certain ideas are just not going to be able to work at a single location, and we don't want every idea that we're having to write to be pinned down like that. But those films are not sprawling and going into 20, 30 odd locations. So now here's a little trick I'll share with you that and this is what I did with The Surrogate. And this is something I learned after shooting a bunch of films as well as writing them. If you have a separate, each location that you have, so you might have your main location, each location you want to have at least 5 screenplay pages dedicated to that location. So the question is, why 5? Now, we know as writers that 1 page on the screenplay equals about 1 minute of screen time. And 5 minutes of shooting in one day is realistic on a lower budget film. So once you've got your screenplay, they're going to go, well, how many pages can we shoot per day? This is what a project will work off. Is this, really big budget where we're going to be shooting 1 minute of screen time a day? TV shows might be shooting 9, 10, 11, 12 minutes a day, which is easier if you've got 2 cameras. On a low budget or an indie film, 5 pages a day is sort of a reasonable amount. So the idea of once you've got a location in your screenplay, if you dedicate 5 minutes to it, that means the crew is going to be shooting there for the whole day. So they need to find one location and spend the whole day there. And for example, if you're filming in a hospital and there's a 2-minute scene at the hospital, think, can I put another scene at that location and try and turn it into 5 pages? It doesn't have to be the same scene. We might just go, perhaps there's a scene that can happen elsewhere in the hospital, or potentially it's an extension of that same scene. Even better, can it expand and maybe find 10 pages of story at that location? So the crew is going to be there for multiple days, because what happens when a crew gets into a location on one day, they're very quickly familiar with how to work with that location, what the lighting set up. So Neil will know everything is about where am I going to put my lights? How am I going to light this? And once you've established that on day 1, and then you come back and then on day 2, it's like straight away we're into it. We're not having to sort of break the back of the location. So, and if that really turns into maybe there's 12 pages and you're doing 3 days at the location, that can work even better. Then if you have to think, well, I absolutely, it has to be, I can't find any other scenes that work there, but I do want to keep this really minimal. Then one of the other options is, can I move that hospital location to somewhere else? So maybe it's them at home recovering rather than in hospital themselves. Again, though, this will really depend on what your story is happening. If you've got to have a scene in it and it's only at that location, it's got to be shorter, then you do need that in your screenplay. What you're trying to avoid is just lots of short scenes at different locations. So that's the broad principle we're working on, because as I said, this will, you can't always do this. You can't always just have one location, or all your scenes have to be, all your locations have to have 5+ minutes at them. So an example of where, we might be minimizing, just was thinking, maybe you've got in your screenplay a scene we've got 1 page at a car dealership, 2 pages in a car park, half a page at a bus stop, a quarter of a page at a fruit shop, and 3 pages at a fairground. So that's 5 different locations for about, I said, about 7 minutes of screen time. So that's why I look at that and go, can we shift the bus stop and the car park to the car dealership? Maybe it's as simple as the scene at the bus stop now happens out the front of the car dealership. So again, we go from filming inside to filming outside. And perhaps we don't need the fruit shop scene at all, or that can also, whatever happens in that scene, maybe that's a conversation between 2 characters. Maybe that happens in the tea room at the car dealership, for example. So now we've gone down to that car dealership has now got 3 of the scenes at it. We're talking about 4 or 5 pages of scenes happening at the one location, and that's 2 locations less to be found.
Just talking about locations, how do you make the difference between doing what could be a studio shot or better to be done on location?
How do you, so it broke up the
first bit? You, film script which I've written, which you've read, I figure I can figure even all the internal scenes, whichever country it's in the studio.
Yeah.
In fact, there's only one street scene which needs to be shot in the actual location of the film.
Yeah.
Is it a better balance to use studio shots for that, or
it depends. So with certain films, the budget will be we can only shoot on location. And this is where you're getting into the more medium budget size. You know, if the budget is over $1 million, especially when you're getting into sort of a 2 million, then what will happen is sets will start to be built, because it's actually cheaper to use sets than locations sometimes. Not so much because of the hiring cost, but it means that you can shoot during the daytime, which is I'm about to get onto about when you're shooting the time of day. But in the studio, you can completely control the environment, and your crew can come in and work in day hours, which is cheaper than night. It'll really depend on what size the budget. Once you're getting into the small stuff, especially when you're getting around that kind of a couple $100,000, usually that will be all location rather than studio space, because you've got to build the sets. So this is why it depends a little bit on the project, and that's why I'm not saying we're just looking at micro budget films. But if you've got a film that you go, we're going to raise $300,000, or even if it's a film that's, you know, $1 million, $1 million's just really not a lot on a production. And if they're looking at $1 million, they're probably going to say, let's find a house to film at rather than build a set. So it'll depend a little bit on that size. But certainly when you get into sets, that's where you can get more locations all built in one place. So that can make a big difference.